Right, good evening everybody and welcome to the Daiwa Anglo-Japanese Foundation. I'm glad you were able to make it on this rather rainy Friday evening. I'm chairing this evening, but before I do that I have to do my housekeeping announcements. So the housekeeping announcements are, if the fire alarm should go off, please don't use the lift. You have to go down 2 flights of stairs out the front door, and we have to congregate on the park side of the street, which will be rather wet at the moment, I think. So hopefully the fire alarm won't go off. And the other thing is, please don't leave any valuables in our cloakrooms downstairs because nobody is monitoring them. I should have said, by the way, my name's Jason James and I'm Director General of the Foundation here. So, we have one of our sort of premium events this evening, and we've actually got 2 speakers who've come over from Japan for this and some other events, looking at the economic implications of disaster reconstruction and obviously drawing on the lessons of the Fukushima nuclear accident, which of course followed the great earthquake and tsunami 5 years ago. And the government at the time decided that there would be a 5-year concentrated reconstruction period. It didn't mean, I think, that they were planning to get everything reconstructed within 5 years, but the idea was to get at least the bulk of it done. So now 5 years are up and we can review how we're getting on with it. But I think it's fair to say that the progress has been a little disappointing. I haven't actually been back there since last March, but I was a little stunned at how little progress had been made, in fact, with reconstructing the affected areas. And I'm thinking here more of the tsunami rather than the nuclear incident. Anyway, so we have 3 speakers this evening, and I'd better turn the floor over to them or we'll be here for too long. First of all, Henry Trix. Now, Henry was actually the Economist's head of the bureau, whatever you were called, from August 2009 until April 2013. So he was the man on the spot when the big earthquake hit. Before that, he worked for the Financial Times, and after that, he's been doing Latin America and is now working on energy issues. And of course, Asia is very important when it comes to energy issues. So he's sort of swiveling back. Pivoting is the term, isn't it? Pivoting back towards Asia at the moment. So that's Henry. And I think our second speaker is going to be Hiroshi Suzuki in the middle. He is the Chief Project Manager of the Nuclear Safety Research Division at the Mitsubishi Research Inc. So this is it's quite a large research think tank connected to the Mitsubishi group of companies. And he's an expert in particular, the transport of nuclear waste and nuclear materials. So obviously he's been extremely busy since 2011. He's been trying to orchestrate the transport in particular of radioactive things that are being removed from the Fukushima site. And then Dr. Yuji Genda on the end there of the University of Tokyo. He's professor at the Institute of Social Science there. And his speciality is labour economics. So hopefully he'll be giving a slightly broader perspective on the kind of economic lessons to be learned from Fukushima. So I'll leave it at that for the moment, and over to you, Henry, to start us off.
Hello, good evening, everyone, and thank you, Jason, very much indeed for the introduction and for the invitation to speak. As Jason said, I was in Tokyo from 2009 until 2013, and I haven't been back since. So my knowledge of what's been going on in the aftermath of when I left is gleaned mostly from reading The Economist. But I thought what I would do today was talk you through a little bit of what I saw when I was there, because I think that in a sense it became clear, surprisingly and depressingly early on, how difficult this reconstruction process was going to be. So if you'll forgive me, in journalistic style, I'm going to use something of a narrative to kick off this discussion. But I do hope that we can, we can have a dialogue, and do stop me or throw questions if you feel like you want to. immediately after the tsunami and the nuclear accident, the first place that I went to was Ishinomaki. And just outside Ishinomaki, on the gateway to the Oshika Peninsula, which is this beautiful peninsula, is a little tiny fishing village called Momonoura. And I arrived in Momonoura very shortly after, when everyone was living in an evacuation shelter, and the town was utterly destroyed. It's a village. It's not even a town. It's a village, and it's just literally around a bay, and it was flattened. And I found two men who I talked to, and they became. I went back several times to pursue their story. One of them was Goto-san, and the other one was Kimura-san. They were two elderly, very strikingly handsome men. And I wrote their story down, and I've never actually published this. And so it was quite interesting to me yesterday, going back through this. And what they told me reveals very much why it's so difficult for local people to lose that dream of reconstruction, the idea that you can create things as they were. But it also shows why reconstruction was always going to be really difficult. Now, Goto-san was the man of duty, the man of action, right? He decided immediately when the earthquake struck that there was one thing that was really important to him, and that was his boat. He was a fisherman, an oyster fisherman. His boat was his livelihood. The oysters in that area are fantastic, because in the 1970s Japan developed this technology for growing oysters that meant that basically they were separated so well that they grew very nicely. And he'd become very rich on the back of one boat. So when the earthquake struck, it wasn't his family that he thought about saving, it was his boat. He actually assumed that his family knew, or his wife knew what to do. So he took his boat and he drove it out into the teeth of the tsunami. And I have this vision of him just like that Hokusai great wave picture, there in the teeth of the tsunami. His best friend, who was a younger man, actually lost his nerve as they were going out and turned his boat round and went back and very sadly was killed. But Goto-san, he kept going, and when he came back the next day and found the village completely destroyed, he spent the next 5 days just digging up in the village, looking for the dead, looking for trying to... He didn't even look for his son and his daughter. His priority was the community. And the amazing thing is that 5 days later, his son comes walking from Ishinomaki over the mountains, down there, sees his father on the beach, and realizes that he's busy, so he doesn't interrupt him. And I say to Goto-san, what did you feel when you saw your son coming? And he just says, and he pulls his fingers down like this to indicate tears running down his face, but he didn't say anything. That's the duty, that's the Japan that looks ahead, no time for self-pity, get down to business, work your way through the problem and move on. And I felt in a sense that Japan, that many of the Japanese were like that after the tsunami, especially after the nuclear accident. There was this sort of sense of like, we don't really, this is in Tokyo, we don't really want to look at that, we want to look away. Of course, I, as a journalist, I thought, this is going to be a pivotal moment in Japan. I wanted it to be a pivotal moment in Japan. Earthquakes have happened at extraordinary times in Japanese history, just before the arrival of the black ships in 1923 and 1930s. It's always been accompanied with quite incredible social change. And so all the journalist community there immediately wrote the story of this is going to be the pivot point in Japan. Whereas I found that a lot of my Japanese friends really were just, kind of, well, thanks for looking into it, but we'd really rather that you didn't. Kimura-san, this other chap who was there, totally different, right? He's the man whose family is completely bound up in village life for generations before. In fact, he showed me, his house, which was a beautiful house, just literally on the jetty, was cut right in two. The bottom floor was completely washed away. The top floor was perfectly intact. including the television that was working and all this kind of stuff. And he had a map on the wall upstairs, which dated back to the 1880s, which showed the house, and it was still Kimura at that stage, right? So right the way through its history, it's been owned by the family. He took me up to see the graves of his ancestors and whatever, and he showed me a slab of rock that was behind his house that registered the height of the tsunami in 1930s, told people what to do and said, don't build below this point. But of course people did, right? So his was a story of strong bonds with the village, love and the beauty of the sea and this kind of thing. But he also expressed something which was really important, and I'm sorry it's taken me so long to get to this. But basically he said this village was dying before the tsunami struck. His children didn't want to be oyster fishermen. His daughter wanted to run a rock and roll band in Tokyo, and she said, but don't tell my dad. And his son worked as an insurance salesman in Sendai, and basically they said, look, there's no entrepreneurship in this area. You're run by a fishing cooperative. We want a fishing export business. You guys can't provide it. You're all old timers stuck in the mud. So we don't want to live here. And he was very worried about this, because what was going to happen to the Kimura house, right? But not just that. They were all in the school, in the primary school where they'd been evacuated to. There was only one child from the village in that school, right? So this is really a village in severe demographic decline beforehand. So let me draw a couple of inferences from all this. Why it is, first of all, that people really want to reconstruct? Well, clearly, these villages are steeped in hundreds of years of tradition and respect for the past, and there is a natural desire to want to continue the way that they've lived. People especially, you hear this time and again, but it is really true, they want to be near the graves of their ancestors. That's where that's where their present comes from. There's another thing. People really want to live by the sea. There's this extraordinary love of the sea in that area that I found very striking. And it's really easy to be romantic about this and say, oh yeah, the sea, it's the sushi, it's the source of Japanese, food, it's the source of Japanese security and this kind of thing. But what was really striking to me was that the Japanese, especially the people who lived along these coastlines, they see it like a bank. Right? This is like the cash machine that just rolls out a steady income year after year after year. And so the sea was hugely important to them. And the mayor of one town, of Kesanuma, that I met, he actually had printed on his business card, after the tsunami, Kesanuma will not disappear as long as there is the sea. Right? And that really struck me as showing how important, this is in spite of the tsunami, right? So the third thing, and we'll talk about the Kesanuma seawall, I guess, a bit later. The third thing is that the generation that predominates in this area is the generation that was, basically alive during the boom years in Japan, and it was a generation brought up to believe that it was kind of possible to eliminate risk, that technology could do it for you, right? You saw this, of course, in the Fukushima nuclear disaster, and I'm sorry, I'm going to talk more about the tsunami, basically, at the moment, and we can talk more about Fukushima and questions and answers afterwards. But anyway, you definitely saw it in the Fukushima nuclear disaster, the fact that there weren't real contingency plans, no backup generators, maps that had completely ignored the fact that there were huge tsunamis, or there was one huge tsunami 400 years ago, in that area, but that was kind of buried because it was uncomfortable for TEPCO to acknowledge. So there is this sort of culture of we can eliminate all risk. And that was the same in Momonoura, because they had a seawall, they had seawall drills. The first thing that Goto-san did when he felt the earthquake was to go running up and down the seawall, closing all the gates. But the thing is that the seawall was only as good as the last tsunami, and at the end of the day, you have to mitigate and manage risk. You can't eliminate it altogether, and you can't think that technology can overcome all the hazards of nature. You have to have a sense of reality. So this brings me to sort of some broad lessons, I guess. The first is that, you know, technology is not enough. You can build higher seawalls. There are extraordinary efforts. In Kesenuma, for example, these 90-meter wide, I can't remember how many meters high seawalls that they're building, just a kind of a massive pouring of concrete into the sea. And, you know, it's fine, but it's, you know, in a sense, it's sort of totally unsustainable. It breaks the connection between the community and the sea, and it gives people a false sense of security. You reduce the risk of a minor disaster, but you know, basically you leave this community completely exposed to a massive one, to these sort of unknown unknowns or known unknowns or whatever. And it gives the idea that you can restore the community to its previous situation, but that basically just repeats the vulnerabilities. So I think technology is, you know, obviously very helpful, and it certainly helped Tokyo during the earthquake in terms of building earthquake-proof buildings and whatever. But it leads to this, you know, this dangerous belief that that you're safe when you're not. I just, you know, basically I think that the really important thing to do here is to think we will only build where the tsunami did not get to, you know, on the high-rise area. And interestingly enough, I found a temple, 400, you know, a very, very, very old temple just inland from the coast in Sendai. And I can't remember what it was called in Japanese, but the English translation was Breaking the Wave. And that temple represented the point where 400 years ago the tsunami reached. So there was, that signalling mechanism was there, but over the centuries I guess it had been ignored. The second point I want to make is you can't fight demographics. We were talking just beforehand about, you know, New Orleans, for example, before Hurricane Katrina was a city that was in demographic decline. There had been an exodus of people from the city beforehand, and it makes it all the more difficult to reconstruct when you have shrinking population, shrinking workforce, and sort of shrinking economic opportunities. You know, many of the young families who are there have moved into, you know, temporary housing in nearby towns, and I got to meet a lot of these young families, and very quickly you realise that the idea of going back was not was becoming more and more remote, because the children were just in different schools, and they actually quite like being in cities. You know, the elderly people, of course, don't. They want to go back, but the young found new opportunities, I guess. Even if they had wonderful memories of their life, they're growing up by the sea. You know, the town is exciting. They get used to it. So they're not going to go back. That means reconstruction really is about catering to the wishes of the elderly. And I think it's important to be pragmatic. I mean, within the world of economy, we see lots of disasters and dislocations. A good one is trade, right? You know, you have trade agreements, and people get some people get really badly affected. And what you do with those people who get really badly affected is you basically pay them directly in the form of training or subsidies or whatever to help mitigate the impacts. I think that what they should have done here was provided a lot more money to those elderly people to put them in decent retirement communities where there was social engagement, spend money teaching them new life skills, use Tohoku as an example of this, you know, as a test bed of this aging society. Because basically the money spent trying to reconstruct their lives, which is huge, is very likely to be money that's misspent. And the third thing is to embrace change. You know, encourage artists. I mean, I found lots of people who sort of wanted to go up and help, but in fact what you want is people to want to go up and live in these communities. Just like in the Rust Belt in America, you get artists coming in and suddenly the value of the area goes up. And there are a lot of people who have a yearning for the countryside and for that sort of slow life in Japan. It would have been great to have put some kind of initiative, especially by offering kind of trade privileges, setting up special economic zones, you know, that sort of thing. But sadly, I think the conclusion to all this is that that the planning was very uncoordinated, very kind of in its own stovepipe. You know, it wasn't very well broadcast around the ministries. So you had that strange example, which I once wrote about how, you know, yes, we've authorised new payments for new fishing boats, but we haven't authorised anyone to rebuild a factory to create ice, right? So what are you going to do with the fish, right? That sort of thing. It was very much kind of, you know, fragmented thinking, and very slow and very hidebound and stuck in its old ways. And I think in short, that, you know, is reflected now in what I understand to be this very sort of slow pace of reconstruction. So I hope we can go into more detail about things. And I'm sorry it was more of a story than anything else, but let's talk later. Thank you.
Great.
はい。Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Hiroshi Suzuki of Mitsubishi Research Institute, a think tank and consulting company based in Tokyo, Japan. I'm very happy to here to with you today and have this chance to speak to you. I will give my talk in world's most common language, broken English. So, let me begin my presentation now. Here is a table of the contents. First, I will talk about the aspect of the accident. Then, I will turn to challenge South Far and our approach. Then, I will conclude with far chain, future challenge. The first topic is aspect of the accident. I would like to compare with the Fukushima accident with Chernobyl accident. This slide shows the scale comparison. This map is Chernobyl, and here is the Japanese Fukushima effect map. The contamination area of Fukushima accident is less than 1/10 the area of the Chernobyl accident. The UTT was able to prevent the event from becoming an even bigger accident. As you know, the Chernobyl accident was initiated by an explosion during the operation. But Fukushima, the radioactive leak occurred after plants shut down. At Chernobyl, many radionuclides had to be considered. But Fukushima, iodide-131, cesium-134, and cesium-137 are really the only target of the consideration. A novel point regarding the Fukushima accident is a refuge. Because of the high population density, Fukushima has the same scale of the Chernobyl time of the number of the person taking a refuge. And now the second topic, challenge so far and our approach. We suppose the decontamination plan of the city. Its city is Kashiwa city of Chiba, near the Tokyo. What we place the great importance on that time was the communication between the citizens' administration and the citizens. The city organized a brief session for decontaminations 2 times. Each session took 5 to 6 hours, long time. Various arguments took place in terms of target of and speed of the decontamination, risk of low-level radiation, etc., which became hot topic all over Japan at the initial stage. In spite of some emotional remarks from the citizens, a sense of truth was finally built among the citizens because of the through participation the city official in question and answer sessions. And second trial is my college and I at MIRI participating in the project of the reduce of contaminated sewage sludge. This facility was designed before the development of the new regulation and guideline of government. Therefore, we made rule make based on the principle of the handling of the radioactive substance. This is a leaflet of this treatment. This is the national project of Minister of the Environment Japan. And 3 companies making a joint venture. Japan Sewage Work Agents, Nippon Steel Sumikin Engineering Corporation, and our company, Mitsubishi Research Institute. My company is just consulting and think tank, but this is an active project, first trial. Next, I turn to the third topic, namely future challenge. The value of the waste collected after the work, decontamination and compaction is quite frankly huge. The Japanese government is considering an intermediate process facility to address this press issue. In order to do that, reduce to the waste volume is independent, and the measure of that purpose is pose challenge. On this slide, we can see the value of the waste to be brought into the intermediate process facility. The total value of the waste is about 20 million cubic meter. Its mean is higher is 20 meter and 1 kilometer square range. You can make an articulous island with these waste. Too big figure. For waste management, our challenge is captured in these 3 items. The first is reuse. Waste with low concentration, if well management, don't absurdly affect the environment. The second is minimize. volume minimalized is essentially for ensure the safe management of the waste. The third is separate, meaning attempt to separate radioactive cesium. Develop of the technology to effect separate cesium is recommended. Although removable of the soil and waste contaminated with radioactive substance is a necessary condition, but it is not the sufficient condition. What is necessary for real rehabilitation of the damaged area? This figure is present the information about the population of the Fukushima. About 2 million people live in Fukushima prefecture, and the population 10 degrees. Even now, after 5 years, there are still some areas where people cannot live near the NPP, this area. What is necessary for the real rehabilitation of the damaged area? This slide shows the product volume in each area of Fukushima Prefecture. Here, this is near the nuclear power plant. This is a bigger product value include nuclear industry. Fukushima has lost that all, and significant damage has been influenced the agriculture, fishing, and other categories as well. Big damage. Here I show the table for Japanese government. The fourth budget. This is for Fukushima. Decontamination and waste treatment represents a very large budget. But area rehabilitation has a no determined value, just request. Because Japan don't yet have a complete image for area rehabilitation. We'd like to make a 4 proposals for area rehabilitation. The first is sweep away bad rumor. Provision of complete and reliability information is a key. The second is self-motivation activity. We should support the will of the residents. The third is create of new industry. The fourth is the PDCA cycle, meaning plan, do, check, adjust. We should have a courage and flexibility to review to the plan. And that's the conclusion of my prepared remarks. Thank you all very much for listening. I hope you are able to learn something about the challenging situation that we are facing in Japan at this time. Thank you.
Good evening. It is more than 5 years since the Great East Japan earthquake that happened on March 11, 2011. Amid the various events and incidents that occur every day, the earthquake is definitely now spoken of less often, even in Japan. When I log on my PC and I go online, my bookmarks include a National Police Agency URL regarding the Great East Japan earthquake. When you click on this, you can see in one place all the information related to the earthquake that the agency has announced. I do this because, for me, this is a custom. I do not forget the earthquake. Why do I look every month? The damage situation numbers slow even now. What I particularly notice is the number of people listed as missing. The most recent information on casualty includes 15,894 dead and 6,152 injured. The total number of people listed as missing is as high as 2,161. The majority of those missing are likely to be victims of the tsunami. Incidentally, 6,434 people died in the Hanshin Awaji earthquake that happened on January 17, 1995, and 3 people are listed as missing there. The high number of people missing after the Great East Japan earthquake must have been overwhelmed in the subsequent tsunami. In fact, the figure for missing people is still falling slightly. In the data published on January 9, 2015, for example, the number of people missing was 2,594. It means that in the intervening months, thanks to the effort of those involved, 33 of these missing people were found and returned to their families. How must those families have felt? A sense of relief is that the long-awaited loved one had finally returned home, or grief reawakened by the disappointment of the belief that they would come home alive, no matter how small the hope for the miracle had been. It is hard to imagine their complex emotions. The disaster from the Great East Japan earthquake do not end, but still continues even now. The Statistics Bureau of Japanese government conducts an employment status survey once every 5 years. It is the largest household survey in Japan relating to employment. Around 1 million people are surveyed nationwide. The most recent survey was conducted in October 2012. According to this survey, the proportion of people working at the disastrous areas whose jobs was affected by the earthquake was close to half at 47%. The proportion of the workers had lost their jobs or taken leave of absence reached to 31%. Among those who lost their jobs or taken leave, the proportion without employment was 14% in October 2012. It is also important to note differences in the effect of on jobs within the disaster zones. The effect of the earthquake in the disaster zone in Fukushima Prefecture was particularly striking. In Fukushima, 67% of those working persons experienced direct harm to their jobs, with 52% being deprived of their jobs as a result of losing their job opportunity. In addition, among the people losing their jobs, 20% of the workers affected in Fukushima were still without employment in October 2012. The proportion was higher than those in Iwate and Miyagi prefectures. This tells the tale of the damage caused by the nuclear accident, giving rise to the extremely harsh circumstances for the residents of surrounding area in Fukushima. These figures classify the people who either lost their jobs or taken leave according to the situation of evacuation. The line graph shows the proportion of those who lost their jobs were still without employment in October 2012. This shows that whereas 8% did not work, then among those who did not experience evacuation, the proportion without employment was twice as high at 19% among those who evacuated. In addition, for those who had returned to their pre-earthquake home after the evacuation, the proportion without employment was almost at the same low level as non-evacuees. In contrast, for the people who had moved to different places after evacuation or who remained in the temporary accommodation as evacuees, the proportion without employment was quite high. In particular, for those who continue to be evacuees, the proportion without employment is striking high at 37%. Furthermore, the figure shows that among those without employment, a lower proportion of the evacuees wished to work or were seeking a job compared to the non-evacuees. In addition, among those who experienced evacuation, people who had moved to a new home or remained as evacuees were less likely to seek a job. Japan's tsunami and nuclear accidents are not only the natural disaster where evacuation caused job discouragement problem. Indeed, research into the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina that hit the southeast of the United States in August 2005 also shows a similar effect of evacuation on discouraging to work. This figure distinguishes the people who have moved to a new home or remained as evacuees into those who settled in the cities or towns where they lived before the earthquake and those who moved to the different ones. The proportion without employment was higher for the people moving to different cities and towns than those for staying at the same ones before the earthquake in each disastrous area. Such tendency is particularly significant among the disaster area in Fukushima. In case of the tsunami area in Fukushima, while the proportion without employment was 9% among the people living in the same cities and towns before the earthquake, but it jumped up to 44% among those moving into different cities and towns. In addition, in case of area under the evacuation order because of the nuclear accident in Fukushima, the proportion without employment was also high at 43% for those moving into different cities and towns. And it was more than 10% higher than those for staying in the same ones before the accident. Not a few of the Fukushima people who moved to the different places from the tsunami disaster zone could not receive the compensation money in Japanese baishoukin to the harm of the nuclear accident. Nevertheless, the proportion without employment was not so much different between sufferers from tsunami and those from nuclear accident in Fukushima. This fact indirectly suggests the reason for non-employment in Fukushima was not always the existence of huge compensation money from nuclear accident, but another serious problem forcing them to move to different unfamiliar areas. People who were forced to evacuate as a result of the tsunami and nuclear accident, such as not a few of the Fukushima evacuees, have their hands full, just continue to live. Even when more settled and starting to think about work, the further the place to which they have been evacuated from their original area of residence, the harder it is to return to their former job. Also, being away from your family area means loss of the use of habitual fishing grounds and farms and being unable to continue with work made possible by local relationship and cooperation, such as social capital. Also, within the family members having been evacuated separately, some mothers have also probably given up work in the face of difficulties of working and looking after children without support of the grandparents. For various reasons like this, being forced to evacuate far from home not only make home life inconvenient, but it also makes employment itself, which should be the basis of securing a livelihood, problematic. There is a high probability an earthquake in the Nankai Trough or under the Tokyo metropolitan area. Such earthquake could well force a higher number of people to live as evacuees far from home than after the Great East Japan earthquake. Besides those displaced by the earthquake, flooding and landslide will mean that many people cannot return to their original homes, but are subsequently forced to be evacuated or move home. We need to give more thought to this kind of serious fact of evacuation to unfamiliar areas. After the earthquake, I was often asked, how many times have you been to the disaster zones? This was partly because they knew that I have kept in touch with the people in Kamaishi City, which is one of the disastrous areas in Iwate Prefecture since 2006. When not a few researchers were bragging about the number of times they visited the area such struck by the disaster up north, I decided to head the West Japanese city in July 2007, when I completed to participate in the Reconstruction Design Council with the government. The name of the city was Minamata in Kumamoto Prefecture. In the 1950s and 60s, it emerged as the original site of an environmental illness connected with the chemical company Shiso's dumping of mercury into the ocean. The disease robbed people of their lives and health, and residents long faced discrimination and stigma. Even today, compensation issues have not been fully resolved. Many residents of Minamata worried about the people in Fukushima as if they were their own family members. They didn't want the victims there to feel the pain and loss that they themselves experienced in the past and even now. When Minamata took a step toward a political statement in 1994, then Mayor Masazumi Yoshii proposed an idea he called remodeling, in Japanese, moyai naoshi. Remodeling means to make connections while acknowledging one another's different positions. It moreover emphasizes the importance of continuing dialogue among citizens. For Fukushima, the path to a resolution is unimaginably long, but history provides at least some hints about possible solutions. If we turn out the eyes of the history of environmental pollution and keep our ears open to the testimony of the witnesses themselves. Finally, there is a well-known phrase in the Sanrik Coast area in Tohoku. That is tsunami-tendenko. Tendenko is a word from teni-teni. Teni-teni means each one or individually. The tendenko means that in the event of tsunami, you should make your own escape a priority, even if your family becomes separated. After the 2011 earthquake, Mamoru Sasaki, Kamaishi City's whole disaster prevention division manager at the time of disaster, he was often asked to speak on the topic of the earthquake nationwide. In addition to expressing gratitude for the support received from many regions following the earthquake, Mr. Sasaki spoke frankly about his feelings of regret and self-reproach for not being able to protect more lives. When the tsunami strikes, escape any way you can. That's all you can do. If you listen to the people's story about tsunami-tendenko, most people seem to understand the importance of prioritizing your own escape in the event of tsunami. However, actual tsunami experience in 2011 proved that tsunami-tendenko is quite difficult to realize. Considering the following situation on March 11, 2011, it was 3 p.m. There was an emergent tsunami warning. A man at the office worried his parents in a house on the coastline as they were unable to move around freely. He asked by phone his wife, working at another office, to go to school to pick up their own children, and he delivered that he would rush to the houses of their parents. A couple in each car hurried from their offices, but the area around the school, which was also on the coastline, was congested, with cars rushing to pick up their families, and no cars could move at all. Then the giant tsunami struck all of them suddenly, and everything was engulfed. Tendenko is not something that is easy to do. Everyone worries about their family more than himself or herself, facing with the tsunami crisis. It is unthinkable to make oneself the priority during the crisis. Then we should say a prayer for the tsunami-tendenko. How can we resolve to protect our own lives and act on this resolve while worrying about the family? The keywords are building trust regularly. In order to build trust, guardians and schools need to regularly discuss the disaster prevention and evacuation in the event of an earthquake or tsunami. When the danger is imminent, they carefully confirm what is best for each person to do. Children often need to tell their parents, "Don't come to get me. It's dangerous if you come." Parents decide, "I will protect my own life first, as I trust the school teachers and I know my children at school will be okay. My children will be heartbroken if I go to school and get caught in the tsunami." If there is no trust of this sort, all lives cannot be protected. The same also applies to the communities where we live. All community residents should know if there are elderly people in the community who are unable to move around easily for themselves. The matter of who should accompany these elderly and escape with them should be decided in advance when the time of crisis will come. There should be a system in neighborhood association for the people to help each other escape in the event of the disaster. The damage will be minimized in communities when the residents trust each other like this. Steady and regular effort to build trusting relationships are indispensable if tendenko is to put into practice. It is worthwhile to ponder over the extent to which communities around Japan have learned to trust each other before we are struck by next big crisis of earthquake or tsunami. Thank you.